Okay, we're good to go. So this morning, we're going to talk about understanding our emotional triggers. And, you know, it's an interesting topic because we all have them. And so we'll do a little bit of dive into like why we have them and you know, how do we work with them? And, you know, how do we leverage them to our best outcome possible? Just watching the chats here. So, so understanding our emotional triggers. So when something bad happens, we have three choices. We can either let it define us, we can let it destroy us, or we can let it strengthen us. And that really speaks a lot about how emotional triggers work. And so basically an emotional trigger or triggered, but generally it's emotional, is when we have a circumstance and that circumstance elicits a feeling from us from inside that might make us frustrated, might make us angry, might make us joyful, but they're not negative, okay? Might make us reflective, might bring us back to another moment that we had in our life that either resembled maybe something that was that made us happy or something that made us maybe a little fearful, or whatever the case may be. So really emotional triggers are things that elicit a certain emotional feeling. Now, the trigger part, okay, is how do we deal with that emotional trigger? So we might be working with something that makes us frustrated, and the frustration might maybe it makes us short with other people, or it makes us maybe more demonstrable with our small motor skills or something like that, or something that makes us happy. And you know, we've all had that like guttural laugh or laugh until we cry, right? So so triggers are not necessarily on the negative side, they're also on the positive side. Some of them might be on the neutral side because reflection is a trigger. You know, I have something happen and it puts me into a reflective state, okay? So our emotional triggers are anything that elicits a certain emotion from us that gets our attention, and it might make us short. We might lose our temper. We might burst out into laughter, or whatever the case may be. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to get to that point, but it's something that will elicit a particular feeling. Now, we talked about this before in the Thriving Through Uncertainty series. So it's important to understand that how we're all wired. You know, we're all kind of wired the same until we undo the wiring. Is that habits are formed through neural nets and neural connections. And so how the expression goes in from neuroscience is that cells that fire together wire together. So the more we have repetitive action or repetitive motion or repetitive thoughts, okay, they're basically, it becomes a neurological connection. If you look at that graph, this picture that we've used before, that illuminated area in the center between the nerve cells, right? That is that's your synaptic connection. And so basically, what ends up happening is that you have a neural pattern or a neural pathway. And so the more we do one thing, okay, or anything for that matter, we build stronger and stronger connections. And those connections, okay, over time, basically continue and they reinforce patterns. So for instance, and I'll just use this to see, understand kind of the gravity of it, right? The full kind of weight of our thought process. So the average person has up to 60,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are the same as the day before. And it takes 3 to 4 weeks to either build a habit or dissolve a habit. So now we think about emotional triggers. So if we have something that emotionally triggers us on a regular basis, or a feeling about something, or an insecurity, or it could be something that's positive, this makes me feel good, so I'm going to do more of this, whatever the case may be, we're building a stronger and stronger neural connection. And it's one of the reasons why, and we talked about this before, it's one of the reasons why habits are so hard to either build, because you're really building a connection, or dissolve, because you're dissolving a connection. And so you have to go through a 3 or 4 week cycle to do either one. And so our emotional triggers kind of develop the same way, where if we keep thinking the same way or feeling the same way, then that is a neural pattern. And that neural pattern gets reinforced every time we think that way. So if we think that I don't like doing this thing because I don't believe I'm good at it, then what we've reinforced is 2 things. One, I pre-programmed myself through a neural connection that I'm not good at this. And the second thing is I pre-programmed myself that I don't like it. That's a neural pathway. And then again, the only way to dissolve that is really through transmuting those thoughts and dropping in other thoughts. So again, we use this in the Thriving Through Uncertainty series about our emotional dashboard. So now we're going to talk about the emotional triggers, right? So we have to understand that triggers become stronger and stronger for us the more we do the same thing, the more we have the same thoughts, right? The more we have the same actions. If you're always used to laughing at a certain thing, then you will always continue to laugh at it. If you're used to flying off the handle with a certain thing, then you'll continue to fly off the handle until you stop and you start to dissolve that pattern. So we have our emotions for a reason. And I really like this dashboard analogy, this metaphor, because we all drive cars, so we can identify with it. And so our emotions are basically like the readout on our dashboard. So our car dashboard will tell us, I need gas, I need oil, I need air in my tires, my navigation system, I need, my battery, all these types of things, how fast I'm going, how slow I'm going, all these things, right? And so think about your emotions that way. So when we have an emotional feeling, okay, that emotional feeling is to get your attention. It's not to get you to act. And we're going to talk about that more in just a second. No different than if you looked at your car and your car said you were getting close to empty and you needed fuel, okay? You wouldn't just look at that and ignore it. You'd find a place to get gas. So our emotions are trying to get our attention. They're not trying to get us to act. They're trying to basically communicate with us, no differently than our car dashboard. So when you get a flash of emotion on something, and again, I just want to go sidebar for a second. We spend a lot of time focusing on the things that don't work, or the things that, we'll say are not good or didn't go the way we wanted to. We spend all of our time focusing on that. When something goes really well, okay, how much time do we spend on it? Very little. We spend very little time in the good space. We spend most of our time focusing on the kind of the not so good space. And so just to find balance with that, we got to spend an equal amount of time understanding all the events, because all the events have a learning component to them. And so that's what our emotions are trying to do. Our emotions are basically signaling us, just like our car dashboard, hey, you need gas, or hey, you need to slow down, right? It's always about getting your attention. And think about your car, right? I mean, you don't just run out of gas. It flashes at you. It tells you something. It says, hey, dummy, you need gas, pull over, right? It's not just going to run out. And our emotions really operate the same way. It's really trying to get your attention. And so emotions don't present themselves so that we react. They come to us as a reminder that there's something in the moment to pay attention to. So it's trying to get your attention. It's trying to get you to focus on, hey, you know what? You feel this way. I want you to unpack it. That's really what it's saying. I want you to understand. I want you to stop long enough to be able to understand why you're feeling this way. It's not important. It's not good enough just to have the feeling. What you want to do is you want to be able to understand why I have the feeling. Now, if I have the feeling, and if I've had the same feeling my whole life, which, I have that. I mean, I have certain things that I have felt my whole life. And it's like, it seems hard, right? Maybe the older you get to well, I should understand why I feel that way. But it doesn't matter how long you've had the feeling. It could be a first time feeling, or it could be, I'm 57, it could be a 57-year-old feeling, okay? But no matter what, okay, when you're having it, it wants you to understand, it's getting your attention for you to unpack that. Because in that unpacking, you're going to learn something. And that's the reason why you have it. You have the feeling because you're being called to learn something. And they come at the exact right time. There's no mistake about when something happens. Everything happens, the old expression, everything happens for a reason. The timing on everything is exquisite, okay? It is better than Swiss watch timing. And so emotions come at the exact moment you need them so that they can be the teacher to help you on the next leg of your journey. And it's got nothing to do with age, young, old, doesn't matter, okay? They always come at the right time. And so if you consider yourself as the student and the emotions as the teacher, and then as you're walking through it, there's this old expression that, the teacher appears when the student is ready. You're the student, your emotions are the teacher, and they're wanting you to learn. They're not torturing you with a feeling, okay? Or they're not giving you that moment of exhilaration just for the purpose of having exhilaration. Just like it's not giving you the moment of frustration just so that you can live in frustration, okay? They've given it to you because your emotions want you to learn. And when you have it at the exact right time so that you can learn, so that you can go on to the next part of your journey. And there's a couple phrases and maybe perspectives to put around it that's helpful. So you have this expression, we've all heard it, right? It's always darkest before dawn. Now, in an athletic sense, which I kind of understand, is that it's always hardest before it gets easier. And I know that when I'm doing something, okay, and I know when I'm at the absolute hardest, that's the time not to quit, because I know that's when the breakthrough is going to happen. It could be at work, it could be exercise, it doesn't matter what it is. So I know when we hit that exact hardest moment, okay, is when we know that we're the closest to the end. And so that's what happens with the emotion piece, right? It kind of bubbles up. And again, could be exhilaration, or it could be frustration or anger, it could be any one of those things. And they bubble up, and then all of a sudden, okay, it gets hard, and then and then what do? Right? We don't spend any time sorting it out. Okay, we just kind of move on, or we just kind of regret having it. And so think about it as a teaching moment when it happens. And one other thing too is the heart. And if you just focus on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. So it wasn't until 1991 that neuroscientists understood that the actual heart has its own brain. And it has up to 40,000 brain-like neurons that really replicate the type of sensory and kind of feeling that the brain has. And so basically the heart operates as its own brain. So and the misnomer is that the brain is sending signals to the heart, and it's the other way around. The heart's sending signals to the brain, okay? And it's one of the reasons why when people will say, you know what, this just doesn't feel right. The heart feels before the brain can calculate. And that's one of the reasons why we want to understand our emotional triggers, okay? Is because most of the emotional triggers are happening before we can figure out why. They just happen. That's why it's called a trigger. And it's because the heart is calling you, okay, to be inquisitive. And so when you want to kind of sort something out, go to the heart first, not the brain. You gotta, it's all counterintuitive. We've been brought up in a Western reductionist way of looking at things, which is basically, we're just kind of, mechanical beings, and you know, we just kind of do things and the brain calculates and that's all we need to know. And it's really just the opposite of that. And so when you want to go deeper on something and you want to understand your emotional triggers, go to your heart first, okay? Feel your way into it, because this is a feeling world, it's not a fact world. If this is a fact world, it would be a much different place to live, wouldn't it? I don't want to do that one, I want to do this one. So I'm going to give you this chart real quick. The difference between moods and emotions. I thought this was kind of fun, right? So moods are, their duration is in minutes to hours. The provocation lowers the threshold to understand the emotion. The regulation is mostly unaffected, so how it modulates, right? Expressions, there's no real mood, there's no real unique or verbal expressions. And then awareness, it's difficult to identify what the exact trigger is when you're in a mood. But emotions are different, right? Emotions are, it's like immediate to minutes. The provocation of it, it's more easily experienced within the mood, and it's much easier to kind of understand what's triggering it. When you're handling an emotion, it's much more difficult to modulate it. It just kind of happens. Expressions are really easy to sort out when someone's having an emotion. Okay, it's something. It's where they're laughing, or there's a frown, or our body language, or whatever the case may be. And then with an emotion, triggers are more easily identifiable. So an emotion tends to be more easily triggered. So in practice, okay, take a moment. When was the last time you were triggered emotionally? Again, don't go negative. It could be either. It could be anything, okay? And what was there to learn? And excuse my typo in here. What was there to learn? And how would you have handled it differently? So when you were triggered last, could be any type of trigger. Could be a quiet trigger. It could be just something that just got your attention and it put you in a mood, okay? Or it got you to kind of think differently about things. But when was the last time you were triggered? And what would you, how would you learn from that? How would you handle it differently? So really great to be with everybody, and hope you have an amazing week. Thanks a lot.